Sir, you'll need to move. This seat is not meant for people like you." The words sliced through the quiet hum of the luxury hotel's lobby, sharp and deliberate, each syllable dripping with the kind of authority that didn't expect to be questioned. Lauren Hayes, the front desk manager of the prestigious Sterling Grand Hotel, stood with arms crossed, her designer name badge catching the light as she stared down at the man before her. Ethan Walker, dressed in a tailored navy suit and carrying a modest leather briefcase, looked up calmly. At 43, he was no stranger to these moments, no stranger to the way power and prejudice often joined hands in quiet public humiliations. His expression remained composed, though anyone paying close attention would notice the brief tightening of his jaw, a familiar tension that had followed him through a lifetime of similar encounters. Across the marble floor, guests checked in without incident. A young couple in designer coats was welcomed with champagne. A corporate executive was personally escorted to the elevator by a smiling concierge. But here, at this particular desk, Ethan had become a problem. "I have a confirmed reservation," he said, his voice steady but polite. "The presidential suite, under the name Ethan Walker." Lauren's smile thinned, a blade hidden in courtesy. "That's not possible. That suite is reserved for our premium clientele. I'm afraid there must be a mistake. Perhaps you meant to book a standard room." Before Ethan could respond, Robert Graham, the hotel's senior manager, appeared at Lauren's side, tall, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of practiced authority that made subordinates fall silent. He glanced at Ethan, then back to the reservation screen. He didn't bother hiding the suspicion in his eyes. "Sir," Robert said, his tone cool and rehearsed, "we'll need to see additional identification and a credit verification for a booking of this level." It was not a request. It was a thinly veiled demand, one not made of the wealthy white guests who had just passed through the lobby without question. Ethan reached into his briefcase and calmly produced his ID and the black Amex card that had booked the suite weeks ago. As he handed them over, a few nearby guests paused, sensing tension. A middle-aged couple exchanged glances. A young man pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages but subtly recording. They had all seen versions of this before, a black man's legitimacy questioned where others was assumed. Lauren glanced at the ID, then at Ethan, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to reconcile his appearance with the name on the reservation. She tapped a few keys on the keyboard, the screen reflecting in her cold stare. "I'm afraid we still can't honor this booking," she said finally. "There's been a system error. The suite is no longer available. You'll need to make other arrangements." The lie hung heavy in the air. Ethan's posture remained unchanged. He had learned long ago not to rise to provocation, not to show anger, because people like Lauren and Robert expected it and were ready to use it as justification for further disrespect. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't just a denial of service. It was the casual dismissal of his dignity. A message clear and intentional, that no matter his success, wealth, or reputation, to them he did not belong. What Lauren and Robert didn't know, or perhaps didn't care to learn, was that Ethan Walker wasn't just another business traveler. He was the founder and CEO of Walker Innovations, a multinational real estate and technology firm valued at over $3 billion. Ironically, Sterling Grand had spent the past 6 months courting his company for a lucrative smart hotel technology partnership, a deal worth $50 million. Yet at this moment, none of that mattered. To them, he was simply a guest to be denied and dismissed. "I see," Ethan said quietly, gathering his documents without rushing. "Then I'll take this matter up with your corporate office." Lauren's smirk faltered for a brief second, but Robert interjected smoothly. "Feel free, sir. But we are well within our rights to refuse service. We appreciate your understanding." Behind them, the lobby doors rotated open again, letting in a gust of cool spring air and a fresh wave of guests, all unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would soon ripple far beyond this luxurious building. Ethan turned, his back straight, and walked toward the lobby's seating area. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene, but he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a quiet call. "Diane," he said, addressing his legal counsel directly, "will be exercising the acquisition option, effective immediately." On the other end, there was a pause. Then a simple reply, "Understood." The people who had just humiliated him were about to discover the true cost of their prejudice, and it would not be paid in apologies. 2 decades before the confrontation at Sterling Grand Hotel, Ethan Walker was a young man in Atlanta with nothing but determination, a second-hand laptop, and a dream too large for the tiny one-bedroom apartment he shared with his mother. His father had passed away when Ethan was just 13, a victim of the senseless violence that so often stole promising lives in their neighborhood. From that moment, Ethan promised himself he would rewrite his family's story. While his peers spent evenings playing basketball or video games, Ethan spent his hours studying real estate markets, teaching himself coding, and consuming every book on business strategy he could borrow or afford. He worked at night as a janitor at a downtown office building, where by day, suited executives talked about deals worth millions. Deals he listened to silently while mopping floors. At 22, he made his first investment. A dilapidated duplex in a declining neighborhood that everyone else said was a financial graveyard. Ethan saw potential. He renovated the property himself, working nights and weekends while juggling a full-time job. Within 2 years, he flipped it for triple the purchase price. That first success wasn't luck. It was vision, grit, and an unwillingness to accept society's low expectations for young black men like him. Ethan reinvested every dollar, expanding from single-family homes to multi-unit apartments, then commercial properties. Along the way, he taught himself the intricacies of zoning laws, property management, and digital marketing. But Ethan wasn't just building a real estate empire. He was also obsessed with technology. As he acquired properties, he noticed how the industry lagged in innovation. He founded Walker Innovations, a company aimed at integrating AI-driven systems into property management and smart building solutions. Under his leadership, Walker Innovations developed cutting-edge software that not only streamlined operations, but also reduced energy consumption and improved tenant experiences. By the time Ethan turned 35, he had secured contracts with some of the nation's largest commercial developers. His company grew exponentially, expanding beyond real estate into logistics, healthcare infrastructure, and luxury hospitality technology, the very sector Sterling Grand now wanted to modernize. Despite his success, Ethan never sought the spotlight. He was known in business circles for his discretion and ethical leadership. His employees described him as demanding but fair. His partners praised his visionary thinking and his unshakable sense of integrity. Yet for all his achievements, Ethan knew that no amount of wealth or prestige could completely shield him from the biases woven into the fabric of society. He had been ignored in boardrooms where he was the most knowledgeable person present, mistaken for security staff at his own events, and now denied the suite he had rightfully booked, simply because the staff at Sterling Grand failed to see beyond his skin color. What the hotel's management didn't realize was that Ethan wasn't just a guest. His company's technology was already transforming hundreds of hotels across the country, streamlining everything from bookings to energy management. Sterling Grand's corporate parent had spent months negotiating with Walker Innovations for a groundbreaking $50 million partnership that would catapult the chain into the future of luxury hospitality. Ironically, just days before his arrival, Ethan had received final board approval to proceed with an acquisition strategy. If negotiations with Sterling Grand's leadership failed to meet his terms, Walker Innovations and its financial partners would move to purchase the struggling hotel outright. A contingency plan now becoming a very real, very personal mission. In that lobby, when Lauren Hayes and Robert Graham dismissed him, they were not turning away a problem guest. They were turning away the man who would soon decide their professional fate. Ethan's quiet call to his legal counsel had set events into motion that could not be reversed. The next 24 hours would not just change his relationship with Sterling Grand. They would change the hotel's entire future, and send a message far louder than any confrontation at a front desk ever could. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of Sterling Grand's lobby, but for Ethan Walker, time seemed to move differently. After Lauren Hayes and Robert Graham had dismissed him with thinly veiled disdain, believing they had successfully rid their five-star establishment of an undesirable guest, Ethan had not protested or pleaded his case further. Instead, he had quietly gathered his phone and briefcase and stepped into the bright, cold air outside the hotel, where he placed a single call that would unravel the entire illusion of power they believed they held. The call was to his chief operating officer, Michelle Grant, a woman whose keen business acumen was matched only by her loyalty to Ethan's mission of combining innovation with social responsibility. As soon as she answered, her calm, professional tone gave way to concern when Ethan described the encounter. "Pull the trigger," he said simply. "It's time." No further explanation was needed. Michelle knew exactly what he meant. For months, Walker Innovations had been quietly evaluating Sterling Grand and its parent company, Premier Lux Holdings. On the surface, the hotel chain projected an image of refinement and modern luxury. Still, Ethan's team had uncovered troubling patterns in employee reviews, customer feedback, and third-party audits. Discrimination complaints had been quietly settled without public disclosure. Promotion rates among minority employees lagged behind industry standards. Internal emails, obtained through anonymous sources, revealed a culture where certain types of clientele were discouraged from frequenting their flagship properties. Ethan hadn't needed these red flags to sense the problem. As a black executive operating in a space dominated by generational wealth and exclusivity, he had long since honed an instinct for environments where smiles concealed suspicion and policies masked prejudice. What the Sterling Grand staff hadn't realized was that Ethan's booking was not simply a luxury stay. It was a stress test. His legal and financial teams were already prepared to finalize either a lucrative technology contract or, should they detect deeper issues, initiate an acquisition of the property itself. His mistreatment had accelerated that decision. Within the hour, Michelle had assembled a crisis response team in a suite at a nearby office tower. Attorneys, public relations experts, and senior advisors gathered around a conference table, laptops open and phones buzzing. Ethan entered the room, his composed expression belying the intensity of the moment. "I want this handled quickly and thoroughly," he instructed. "But not vindicatively. We're not here for revenge. We're here for accountability and change." The first step was to secure the footage. Several hotel guests who had witnessed the encounter had already reached out to Walker Innovations through social media and email, offering video recordings and eyewitness accounts. One video, captured by a young black woman named Sierra James, clearly showed Lauren Hayes refusing Ethan's booking and dismissing his platinum-level reservation without any legitimate cause. Another clip, taken from a different angle, captured Robert Graham's smirk as he supported Lauren's decision. Simultaneously, Walker Innovations' legal team began combing through Sterling Grand's corporate policies and recent statements on diversity and inclusion. They found glowing public commitments to fairness that stood in stark contrast to the reality Ethan had experienced. The contradictions would prove invaluable. At 5:45 p.m., Ethan's attorneys filed a formal notice of intent to purchase the Sterling Grand Hotel and requested an emergency shareholder meeting with Premier Lux Holdings. The board members, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Several were vacationing abroad. Others were attending conferences. All were now urgently summoned to an emergency session scheduled for the next morning. Meanwhile, Premier Lux's CEO, Richard Coleman, reviewed the situation with growing dread. At first, he had assumed this was merely a customer service complaint that could be resolved with a formal apology and perhaps a complimentary stay. When he learned the guest involved was Ethan Walker, not only a billionaire but also a leading voice in ethical business practices and diversity advocacy, his stomach dropped. Coleman had been negotiating with Walker Innovations for months, hoping to integrate their technology across Premier Lux's entire portfolio. Losing that contract would be disastrous enough. But the potential public relations fallout, combined with the risk of a hostile takeover, threatened the company's very survival. Desperate, Coleman called Ethan directly. "Mr. Walker," he began, his voice strained, "I want to express my deepest apologies for what occurred today. I assure you, this is not reflective of our company's values." Ethan interrupted gently but firmly. "Mr. Coleman, I appreciate the gesture, but this isn't about apologies anymore. It's about systemic issues that go far beyond my individual experience." Coleman tried to steer the conversation toward negotiation, suggesting possible disciplinary action against the employees involved and offering to revisit the technology partnership. But Ethan made it clear that any resolution would require not just words but action, starting with full cooperation in the pending acquisition process. By 8 p.m., news of the incident had begun to spread beyond the hotel's marble walls. Sierra James had posted her video on social media, where it quickly went viral. Major news outlets picked up the story, framing it not just as a case of discrimination, but as a test of corporate accountability in the luxury hospitality industry. As the sun rose the next morning, Sterling Grand's opulent boardroom filled with Premier Lux executives, legal counsel, and a few hastily summoned public relations consultants. Ethan arrived precisely on time, flanked by Michelle Grant and his lead attorney, David Lynn. He wore a tailored navy suit and a calm expression, radiating the quiet authority of someone who had come prepared not for confrontation but for resolution. Coleman opened the meeting with more apologies and assurances. Some board members nodded solemnly. Others avoided eye contact, already anticipating the storm about to break. Ethan stood and addressed the room. "I did not come here seeking to punish individuals," he began. "But what happened to me reflects a culture that must be addressed. Not just for my sake but for every guest, every employee, and every stakeholder who deserves better." He outlined his terms clearly. Full cooperation with the acquisition process. Immediate suspension of Lauren Hayes and Robert Graham pending further review. A commitment to implement Walker Innovations' diversity and inclusion technology across all Premier Lux properties. Silence followed his statement, broken only by the rustle of papers and the clicking of pens. Coleman and several board members exchanged hushed remarks before conceding to the terms. But the reckoning was not over. As the meeting concluded, hotel security arrived at the boardroom doors. Under the quiet supervision of Walker Innovations compliance officers, Lauren Hayes and Robert Graham were escorted into the room, faces pale, eyes wide with confusion. They had been told to report for a disciplinary review. Instead, they found themselves facing the man they had dismissed just 24 hours earlier. Ethan turned to them, his expression neither angry nor vindictive. "I believe in accountability," he said simply. "Effective immediately, your employment with Sterling Grand is terminated." Lauren's lips parted in protest, but no words came. Robert's shoulders sagged in defeat. The hotel's staff and guests would later recall how swiftly the culture at Sterling Grand began to shift. New policies were enacted. Employees underwent comprehensive anti-bias training developed in collaboration with leading civil rights organizations. Ethan's technology was integrated not just to enhance operations but to monitor service patterns and ensure fairness across every customer interaction. And as for the suite Ethan had originally booked, it remained unoccupied for weeks, a silent reminder of the price of prejudice and the power of resilience. The termination of Lauren Hayes and Robert Graham sent immediate ripples throughout the Sterling Grand and Premier Lux Holdings as a whole. Though their dismissal had been swift, professional, and entirely justified, the consequences of their actions would continue to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. By noon the next day, the story had made headlines across major media outlets, not merely as a sensational tale of a black CEO buying the hotel that humiliated him, but as a profound statement about accountability and systemic change in the luxury hospitality industry. Reporters gathered outside the Sterling Grand, their cameras pointed at the building's gilded entrance. Guests were interviewed about their experiences at the hotel. Some spoke candidly about subtle biases they had felt but never dared mention. Others described how, for the first time, they felt their voices were being heard and that perhaps meaningful change was finally on the horizon. Back inside the hotel, Ethan Walker met with the remaining senior staff. The room was filled with anxious faces. Department heads, concierge supervisors, executive chefs, and housekeeping managers who had all witnessed the drama of the past 48 hours. Many were worried for their positions, unsure whether they would be held responsible for the toxic culture that had festered under their noses. Ethan stood at the front of the room, Michelle Grant and David Lynn at his side. He wasn't there to threaten or reprimand but to lead. "I know many of you are wondering what comes next," Ethan began, his voice steady. "Let me be clear. This is not a purge. We're not looking to punish everyone for the mistakes of a few. But we are going to change how this hotel and this company operates moving forward." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. "I understand fear," he continued. "It makes people complicit. Fear of speaking up. Fear of losing your job. Fear of being the one who disrupts the status quo. But today that ends. From this moment, this hotel will become a model of transparency, respect, and fairness." Michelle stepped forward and distributed a newly drafted employee charter titled the Walker Standard, outlining a comprehensive code of conduct designed to prevent bias and promote diversity at every level of the organization. The charter also established a confidential reporting system for employees to safely report incidents of discrimination or misconduct without fear of retaliation. Training programs were scheduled to begin immediately. Not the typical checkbox seminars designed to placate regulators, but immersive, challenging workshops led by experts in social psychology, human resources law, and civil rights advocacy. Employees would learn not just what discrimination looked like, but how it manifested in unconscious behaviors and policies that had long gone unchallenged. Meanwhile, Ethan's technology team began implementing an advanced bias detection algorithm into the hotel's customer service systems. The AI-driven software would monitor guest interactions, flagging patterns that suggested unequal treatment based on race, gender, disability, or socioeconomic status. It would also analyze performance reviews, promotions, and hiring data to ensure that fairness was more than just a slogan, it was measurable. The board of Premier Lux Holdings quickly realized that Ethan's influence extended beyond the walls of the Sterling Grand. As news of the reform spread, other hotel managers and employees from Premier Lux's vast network of properties began requesting similar training and technology implementations. Some resisted, fearing disruption to their established procedures, but most embraced the opportunity to be part of a transformative movement. Ethan didn't stop there. He knew that for change to be lasting, it had to extend beyond corporate policies and employee manuals. He arranged a series of public forums titled Hospitality Without Prejudice, inviting guests, employees, civil rights leaders, and industry experts to engage in open dialogues about inclusion and customer service in the modern age. The first forum, held in the Sterling Grand's refurbished ballroom, drew hundreds of attendees and was streamed online to thousands more. It wasn't long before other luxury hotel chains, some competitors, some collaborators, began reaching out to Ethan and his team. What had started as a response to a personal injustice was now sparking a broader industry reckoning. Back at the Sterling Grand, the physical changes to the hotel were becoming as evident as the cultural ones. Artworks by diverse local artists adorned the once sterile, traditional hallways. The hotel's marketing materials shifted to feature a broader range of clientele, celebrating inclusion rather than pandering to outdated notions of exclusivity. Even the staff uniforms were updated, designed to be practical and dignified, with employee input taken into account for the first time in years. For many employees, the change was deeply personal. Jasmine Rivera, a front desk supervisor who had witnessed Ethan's initial mistreatment but had been too fearful to intervene, became one of the most vocal champions of the new policies. She volunteered to lead peer support groups for staff struggling to adapt to the changes and even shared her own journey at one of the public forums, inspiring others to reflect on their roles in the past culture of silence. Meanwhile, the two security guards who had escorted Ethan from the lobby on that fateful day approached him privately. They admitted that while they had acted on orders, they now understood how their compliance had contributed to the problem. Rather than dismissing them, Ethan offered them spots in the leadership training program. Both accepted, eager to become part of the solution rather than relics of the problem. Of course, not everyone was ready for change. A small but vocal minority of employees and guests expressed resentment. Tradition that excludes or discriminates is not tradition worth preserving, he stated at the second public forum. The audience's applause was thunderous. By the end of the month, the Sterling Grand was no longer just a luxury hotel. It had become a symbol, a case study in how institutions could confront their flaws, hold the right people accountable, and emerge stronger and more just. And through it all, Ethan Walker remained not as a distant owner dictating change from afar, but as a visible leader, walking the halls, listening to staff, speaking to guests, and living the values he demanded from others. The swift dismissal of Lauren Hayes and Robert Graham had sent a clear message to everyone watching, not just employees within the Sterling Grand, but the entire luxury hospitality industry. Yet for Lauren and Robert, the true consequences of their actions were only beginning to unfold. The public may have seen a headline, but behind the scenes, the fall from grace was steep, unforgiving, and, at times, humiliating. Lauren had always believed herself untouchable. For years, she had cultivated an image of poised authority, priding herself on maintaining what she called standards of elegance. She often boasted about her intuition, her ability to read guests and determine who belonged in luxury spaces and who did not. That intuition, however, had now been unmasked for what it truly was: unconscious bias and entitlement wrapped in professionalism. In the first few days after her termination, Lauren told herself this was a temporary setback. She quickly polished her resume and began applying to other prestigious hotels. Yet interview after interview ended in thinly veiled rejection. Word travels fast in the hospitality world, especially when a scandal goes viral. Several managers declined to even meet her in person, citing a need for fresh leadership untainted by recent controversies. Her social circle, once vibrant, began shrinking. Friends distanced themselves. Former colleagues who had once shared drinks and gossip in the staff lounge avoided her calls. Even some of her family members expressed quiet disappointment. The video clips that had circulated online showed not only her dismissive tone toward Ethan Walker, but also captured the arrogance in her posture and the cold disdain in her eyes. These were not images easily forgotten or forgiven. Meanwhile, Robert Graham faced his own reckoning. As a manager, he had once relished the power he wielded, believing it his duty to enforce the unspoken hierarchies of the Sterling Grand. But when those hierarchies crumbled, so did his sense of control. He, too, sought employment elsewhere but found every door closed. No luxury hotel wanted to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with discrimination and poor judgment. Worse still, Robert's attempt to justify his actions publicly, framing himself as merely following long-standing policies, backfired spectacularly. His statement was met with widespread condemnation. Critics pointed out that adhering to unjust policies was no excuse for mistreatment. Public figures, journalists, and activists seized on his words as a prime example of the very mindset the hospitality industry needed to dismantle. As for Victoria Evans, the wealthy socialite whose demand had set the entire incident into motion, she found that privilege could only shield her so far. Premier Lux Holdings had quietly revoked her preferred guest status across all of its properties. Other hotel chains followed suit, wary of the backlash that could come from catering to someone now publicly associated with elitism and prejudice. At first, Victoria attempted to brush off the consequences. "This will blow over," she told herself and her remaining friends. Yet the internet never forgets. Memes featuring her disdainful expression flooded social media. "Do you know who I am?" became a punchline associated with her name, even though she had never actually spoken those words. The symbolism of her entitlement was all that mattered now. Beyond the individual consequences, a broader transformation was occurring. As the Sterling Grand's reforms took hold and Ethan's bias detection software was adopted by other premier Lux properties, employees began to report a shift in workplace culture. Microaggressions and favoritism became less frequent. Guests noticed, too. Travelers who had long felt invisible or marginalized within luxury spaces began sharing positive experiences online, generating a wave of goodwill and free publicity for the hotel chain. Other hospitality brands took note. Competing chains reached out to Ethan's team, seeking consultations on how to replicate the Sterling Grand's success. What had begun as a personal stand against injustice was now influencing policies across an entire industry. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to lead by example. Rather than dwelling on the downfall of those who had wronged him, he focused on uplifting others. He established the Walker Fellowship, a program designed to mentor young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds seeking careers in hospitality management. The fellowship provided scholarships, hands-on experience, and, most importantly, a network of support. When asked in an interview about Lauren, Robert, and Victoria, Ethan's response was measured but firm. "Accountability is not the same as vengeance," he said. "They faced consequences because of their choices. But my focus is on creating opportunities, not perpetuating grudges." For Lauren, Robert, and Victoria, the future remained uncertain. Redemption would not come easily, if at all. Yet the legacy of their actions, both their wrongdoing and the accountability that followed, had sparked a necessary conversation. One that extended far beyond a single hotel lobby or a single viral video. It was a reminder that in today's interconnected world, prejudice disguised as policy could no longer hide in shadows. It would be exposed, confronted, and replaced by something better. And for those willing to learn from their mistakes, perhaps, just perhaps, a path toward growth might still exist. But for now, they would have to watch as the world moved forward without them, led by a man they had once deemed unworthy of a simple night's stay. 6 months had passed since the fateful day Ethan Walker walked into the Sterling Grand Hotel and was treated not as the accomplished CEO he was, but as someone unworthy of basic respect. The scandal that had erupted in the days that followed had long since left the headlines, but the changes it triggered were just beginning to blossom. Premier Lux Holdings had completed its full rollout of the equity service model, the comprehensive training and accountability program Ethan and his team had introduced. Every employee, from housekeeping to senior executives, had undergone hours of workshops focusing on bias recognition, conflict resolution, and customer respect. But it wasn't just a checklist or a PR exercise. Real change was happening. Guest satisfaction scores soared, especially among demographics that had historically reported feeling marginalized or overlooked in luxury spaces. Ethan's company, Walker Technologies, continued to monitor and provide analytics to ensure that the training wasn't just a temporary fix but a long-term cultural shift. Independent auditors confirmed that Sterling Grand and its sister properties now led the industry in service equity. And guests noticed. Testimonials flooded in from customers who shared stories of positive, inclusive experiences at the once troubled hotel. Social media influencers highlighted the changes. Travel bloggers praised the Sterling Grand as a model of how the hospitality industry could and should evolve. Ethan, however, refused to take full credit. At a press conference held in the hotel's newly renovated grand ballroom, he stood before a crowd of journalists, employees, and community leaders. Behind him, a diverse group of staff members, many of whom had been early champions of the new policies, stood proudly. "This isn't about me," Ethan began. "It's about all the people who spoke up, who refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to stay. Change is never easy, but when people come together with a shared purpose, it becomes possible." The room erupted in applause. But Ethan wasn't done. He announced the creation of the Walker Pathways Initiative, a partnership between Walker Technologies and Premier Lux Holdings. The program would provide scholarships and leadership training for young people from underrepresented backgrounds who aspire to careers in hospitality management. "We aren't just changing policies," Ethan declared. "We're building futures." The first cohort of Walker Pathways fellows stood in the audience, their faces beaming with hope and determination. Some had once worked low-wage jobs in hotels where they were overlooked and undervalued. Now they were being trained as the next generation of hospitality leaders. Even some former critics of the reforms had come around. Competing hotel chains reached out to Walker Technologies for consultations. A few even adopted the equity service model themselves, realizing that fairness wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. As for Ethan, he continued his quiet leadership style. He declined offers to write a memoir or star in a documentary. "This isn't about turning a personal victory into fame," he told a reporter. "It's about creating a blueprint others can follow." In the months ahead, Sterling Grand hosted industry conferences where hotel executives from around the world gathered to learn from the transformation. Ethan often spoke at these events but always emphasized collective responsibility. "No one person can change an industry," he would say, "but one person can start a change that others choose to carry forward." By the end of the year, Ethan was recognized not just as a successful entrepreneur but as a thought leader who had challenged an entire industry to examine itself honestly. And in doing so, he proved a timeless truth. Dignity is not something others grant you. It's something you carry with you, even when others refuse to see it. And when you refuse to accept disrespect, you don't just reclaim your own dignity. You clear a path for others to walk with pride as well. If the story moved you, if you believe that dignity and fairness should never be negotiable, not in business, not in life, let your voice be heard. Click like, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories where justice prevails, and where those underestimated today become the leaders of tomorrow. And tell us in the comments, have you ever faced a moment where you stood your ground for what was right? We read every story, and your voice matters.